fun. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. This is the final session. We were just commenting internally about how surprised we are to be at our last in a series of 6 sessions that we're working with together with GrantsPlus, and we're so grateful to them for being with us and offering these programs that have been recorded and are made available. So if this is your first session or your 6th, thank you for joining us, and know that any sessions that you might have missed would also be available so that you can go back and rewatch these and revisit them. So I'm so grateful for today's session on attracting national funders, and we're gonna have two of GrantsPlus's heavy hitters with us today. So thanks for being with us. My name is Maggie Martinelli. I'm the the VP of Administration and Operations at the Scranton Area Community Foundation. I don't have a whole lot to do with the grants process, but I too am very interested in this topic. Scranton Area Community Foundation, as you well know, has been around since 1954, serving the Northeastern Pennsylvania region, specifically Lackawanna County. We have assets of more than $55 million, and we're actually up to a little bit over 250 charitable funds. It's been a busy year. And we've given out over $4 million in grants and scholarships in 2020. We're probably going to exceed that. We're right around the $5 million mark here in 2021, which we're very proud of. We also offer foundation management services through the Robert H. Spitz Foundation and the Northeast Pennsylvania Healthcare Foundation, which many of you also are probably familiar with. But we are very interested at the foundation in offering capacity building support to all of our nonprofit partners. And we do that through our Center for Community Leadership and Nonprofit Excellence. We established this, it's gonna be going on 10 years ago. And we like to offer technical assistance, training programs, capacity building grants, and opportunities like we have today, working with GrantsPlus and learning more about how we can broaden our reach. We believe that when we invest in your capacity and your ability to go get grants, that you are better able to meet your missions, which enables us to better meet our mission to help improve our community. So working together works for the community as a whole. So we're very grateful today to have Lauren Steiner and Danny Textoris with us. And they are going to be presenting today's topic, as I mentioned, about attracting national funders, which is really important because bringing in national dollars to our region allows our more regional dollars to go a little bit further. So it's a win-win for everybody. And so we're very grateful to have them here with us today. I will be hiding out in the background, but I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A and the chat. So please, feel free to put your comments or questions in there, and we'll keep an eye on that. So Dana, Lauren, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And thanks to everybody who's joining us. We know the holiday season gets busy, and so we appreciate your time, and we've appreciated all the time that we've spent with you over these last few months. It's been enriching for us, and we hope for you too. You can see here our whole team waving, saying happy holidays. All of us really enjoy working with nonprofit organizations across the country to help them be smarter and more successful at raising grant funding. And we love when we get to do it in this way, where we are able to share some of our best practices, our knowledge, and do so in partnership with organizations and foundations. Maggie, we've really appreciated you throughout this process, and we are both excited and a little sad that this ends our series together. So let's get right into it, because we know that this is a topic of great interest. Maggie just mentioned, there is, it kind of all ships rise when there is an opportunity to bring outside funding into a local area. And we know this is an area of great interest to organizations who are thinking about how can we be maximizing funding, how can we be seeking from new funders, and where might there be opportunities with funders we aren't familiar with, who aren't in our own backyard. So today, what we're going to be bringing to you is a dose of of reality, of optimism, and of practical tips to help you think about your organization's unique context and what that means in the context of seeking national funding. So some of what we'll address today: who is competitive for national level funding? Spoiler alert, just because you want national funding doesn't necessarily mean that you are a realistic candidate to receive that. And we'd rather tell you here today than have you spin your wheels. So we'll get into that. Also, what are national level funders looking for? And how can you be competitive to approach them? So we're going to jump right in. And Lauren, who is the founder and president of GrantsPlus and has been doing this work for a long time, is going to get us right into it.
Thanks, Dana. And thank you so much, Maggie. We've really enjoyed working with you. So first is a common question. I would say what we most commonly hear from organizations is that they're ready for their national funding, right? They've conquered their local funding market and they are ready for those national dollars to come. And the truth is, as Dana shared, it is not a given and it is not necessarily right for every organization. The right question we think that you should be asking is, should our organization be getting national funding? And the truth is, there's a bunch of factors at play in this equation. So we're going to talk about how you make that assessment today. You can flip to the next slide, Matt. So a key point in this is that for the overwhelming majority of organizations who make impact in their local community, most of their funding will come from funders who are concerned with that local area. And that means funders that are also located in that area. The truth is that most funding sources came from a family or a corporation that was bound to a place because of either history or significant time spent in a region or area. And so many funders remain loyal to that region or that area for their philanthropic support. And you can flip to the next slide. And the truth is that there are just not thousands of grant makers out there that are just waiting to fund your very local work. So we looked since 2010, there are just over 150,000 foundations, corporations, and government agencies, and any other grant-making entities that are listed and cataloged in a primary resource for us, which is the foundation directory. And of these, just over 150,000, only 1,300 or 0.8%, less than 1%, made grants in either Luzerne or Lackawanna counties. And so note that we are not looking at funders that explicitly state that they care about or that they are concerned with Luzerne or Lackawanna counties. We are looking at funders who have actually made gifts in one or both of those counties. So let's go to the next grant. So what are we talking about when we talk about national funders? Well, one type of national funder is the corporate foundations. And among our clients who are serving a local area, corporate grants can be that most common national level funding that they receive. And think of the major major corporations like UPS or Toyota or the Home Depot, Target Corporation. And corporate foundations are often blending, especially at this level, a national funding reach with some sort of local presence, because many of these corporations will only make grants where they have some type of local presence. Think of their plants or their stores or their warehouses. And the reason for that, it's really valuable to understand that the reason for that is they have a vested interest in the success of that community because they have a presence there. And so corporate foundations are part of a larger concept, which is corporate social responsibility, or CSR for short. And that is the responsibility that corporations have. This is like from turn of the century times to give back in the communities that are supporting them. And then let's think, there are some that are regulated. So banks are very regulated, their corporate social responsibility. They actually have to demonstrate certain levels of investment in the local communities to their government regulators. But then there's a lot of other industries that are not regulated. So for large companies, think like Walmart, Coca-Cola, Bank of America, well, where they're concerned with, that's going to be the whole country. They may have specific focus areas like we're in Atlanta, where Coca-Cola is headquartered, but essentially Coca-Cola, who is their target audience? Their target audience is some, international. But some corporate funders based on that, sometimes only make funding decisions on a national level. I think Toyota is one that does that. It's like they're really looking at their North American giving on the sort of national level. And then others may have local committees that make grant decisions. So there's a truth in grant seeking that we follow. And that is, if you know one funder, you know one funder. And that's going to apply to this whole presentation, because we can give specific examples, and then there's always going to be an exception to that example. Funders really tend to get to make their own rules, and they do. So let's look at an example here. We have the Tegna Foundation, and Tegna is a media company. I think they own NBC affiliate stations. And so this is from the Tegna website, and it shows two communities in Pennsylvania. And it's, very specific about the location. And if an organization is near one of these communities, where these Tegna-owned affiliates are, it may be eligible for grant funding. And if you're not located near one of them, you're likely not eligible. And so the other thing to note, and this is just specific to the Tegna Foundation, they also have a separate and a larger grant program for organizations that are located near their headquarters, which is in DC. So just an example of how that corporate philanthropy might work on the national level. We can hit the next one. So another way to gain national funding would be federal funding. And we could do a whole seminar on this, but we're just going to go very, very broad strokes. The federal government gives funding through agencies, and there's some 26 or 27 agencies. And there are over 1,000 competitive grant programs. And these are agency names that you're familiar with: the Department of Veteran Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Science Foundation, or U.S. Department of Labor or Department of Justice. And so many of our local serving clients also receive federal funding as their maybe only national level funding. And the competitive grants are those that are open with an application process, as opposed to other vehicles of funding that may come from the federal government. There's some like formula grants. There are cooperative agreements, which are more like government contracts. But these are what we're talking about here, these competitive grant funding opportunities. So as a whole, these are usually 6-figure grants and above. They are usually a lot of work to apply, a lot of work to track. Usually there's a quick turnaround time between when an RFP or an FOA, funding opportunity announcement, is released and when decisions are made. We looked at something to show us that of the largest 100 grants in the greater Scranton area in the last 10 years, 70 of those, so 70%, were federal grants. So this is just a way to state that, and I've heard it from program officers of private foundations, the federal government in funding nonprofits is a heavyweight, right? Like if the federal government cares about what you're doing, it is worth it to explore whether you may be competitive for a federal grant. And so most federal grants are targeted to very specific services. Think of things like addiction services, STEM education, specific research, in the arts and culture space, museum exhibitions. And the other thing to note about some federal funding is sometimes they're looking for pilots, new innovations, things like that. They also can look for organizations that want to pilot something or be the leader or a clearinghouse for other future grantees. And then also another note about federal grants, and like I said, we could go into tons of detail, but we don't have the time here, is that some programs are regional. So there is also, for an example, there's a thing called the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is not one of those 26 or 27 agencies. They're actually a collaborative of agencies, and they fund economic development in 423 counties in the US, from Mississippi to Southern New York, and they actually include your area, Northeast Pennsylvania. So another type of national funding, again, this is really painting it with a very broad brush, is what we're calling program-based grants. It could also be called, though, issue-based grants. And these are national level funders who are making grants to local organizations for a specific set of issues or challenges that they care about. And they may fund multiple organizations doing that kind of similar work. And it can range from a handful to even hundreds of grants made in these certain areas. And so we've listed here some examples of, hold on one second. Sorry. We've listed here some examples of the types of grants that these types of issues that these funders may care about. So they may care about cultural organizations, healthcare, social justice, education, human services, and there may be many, many more examples of this kind of thing. So we have an example next of a program-based national funder, and that's the Weinberg Foundation. This is the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. And just note, they give for very specific types of services. They say housing, health, jobs, education, and community services. And they're giving in 7 priority locations, and they state, and in the rural areas that surround them. And so remember this one, because this one's going to come back up for us. So another type of funding to keep your eye on are these, we called it Wildcard, but these mega grants that we've been hearing tons about. So it's really been in the past few years, we've seen this rise. And some of these are even international. So some examples of these, 100 and change. This is from MacArthur Foundation, and they are giving away $100 million for any organization anywhere. And they also give some money to finalists, some 15 million to certain finalists. Largely, these have been national organizations and organizations with international impact. And we had an example. They gave a grant. They gave one of the 100 million to Rice University. And we, looking closely at what Rice was doing, they were working in Malawi in Africa, and it was a project related to infant mortality. So really, when you think about it, it was local work in a specific area, but it really had the potential to impact an international, what's known as an international tragic issue. Another example is Google, making grants in multiple cities. So they've given $1 million grants in specific cities, and it's broken down to many $175,000 grants for local organizations in those specific cities. And then last example we have here is the JP Morgan Chase Advancing Cities initiative. And that was promising $3 million for any organization in its footprint, right, in the communities JP Morgan Chase cares about, that advances its own goals. That is another sort of truth in grant seeking I'd like to make sure that we all understand. And that is that in the relationship between grantee and grantor, we are really helping grantors further their own mission through our work. So it's just an important thing to always consider when we're making the case to them. So JP Morgan Chase's goals include connecting people to pathway jobs and providing small businesses with critical resources. So those organizations that are doing that work, they then required collaboration between government, nonprofit, and business, which we hear in our world is called this trisectoral approach. And then there are these in these specific communities. So think about all the things that you have to line up for an organization to be competitive for one of these JP Morgan Chase advancing cities grants. And then we'll throw another wild card, another mega gift opportunity on here. And that is Mackenzie Scott and all of the money that she has been giving away. So she gave grants between $750,000 and $60 million to many organizations. She's given billions. It's been entirely at her direction. She doesn't generally talk to the nonprofits that she funds ahead of time. She's been working with the Bridgespan Group and other consultants to distribute the checks. Generally, they're unsolicited, they're unrestricted, and they're millions of dollars. And the biggest thing to know about these is that they're totally under the radar because she is not giving them away through a private or a corporate foundation, which is required by law to report to the IRS what they do. She's giving them away as an individual, which means she has the prerogative to explain or tell or list who she's giving grants to. And all she's done so far is list them in a blog. And that's as much as, we know. And she has every prerogative to not say anything about it at all. And it's been hotly debated whether the organizations themselves have any duty to tell everyone that they've gotten the grants. And to date, that's not been the case. So I'm going to flip it over now to Dana, who's going to take it a little bit local for you with some examples. Oh, muted.
Thank you. So we've been grounding us in in a general understanding of the types of national funders and what it is that is compelling them to give. I think that this is really important and worth hitting on the head again. We're going to look at some real organizations in your area and what kinds of national funding they are getting so that we can see in real time how this applies. But I want us to keep in mind what's most important is, and Matt, before you go forward, what I want to emphasize is that, again, what Lauren's been pointing out is it's not, how well are you doing? And darn it, you deserve big funding. It's not about, that you think it's your time. It really is about identifying what does the funder care about and how does that align and intersect with what you are doing and how you make their mission come alive in the world. Lauren said it really well. And as we move forward and look at these examples, please have that context in mind. So Matt, now let's go ahead and let's look at, so what's actually happening in Northeastern Pennsylvania? So we dug a little bit into the data and what is available to us, which is a caveat that we share, which is that the next several slides are all based on data that we were able to pull that is publicly available. And so it may provide, it's providing perhaps a limited picture in some cases, but a very representative picture, we think. So first, some grounding that since 2010, organizations in Northeastern Pennsylvania have received more than $630 million from just over 17,000 grants. It's quite a few of them. And what we weren't able to do is dissect all of that grant funding. So we looked at, let's look at the 99 of these grants that are the largest, that are grants of $1 million and above. And what we see when we look at those $1 million plus grants since 2010 is where was that funding coming from? Now, what's notable is the majority of that big dollar funding was coming from national sources, primarily federal agencies, as Lauren said, 70%, and also national private funders, and another 13% of that coming from Pennsylvania funders. So, it's not to say, it is attractive funding because, the largest grants tend to come from these funders who are national scale funders. Now let's take a look at how did this actually play out with individual organizations? So the first organization that we're going to look at is the Scranton Counseling Center. And what you can see here, and so this will be similar from slide to slide, is this graph that is showing what portion of grants received since 2010 came from local versus Pennsylvania versus outside funders. And that dark color that you see here, these are local funders that the Scranton Counseling Center received funding from. And that makes sense. The reason being that this is an organization focused on delivering local services to a local population. And so the funders who are most motivated, most concerned with supporting that work are funders located in that area who also are concerned about the well-being of that community. It is notable, and Lauren told you to keep this foundation in mind, that they have received some national funding, and that funding came from a single funder, the Wildcard Foundation, who, if you remember, has your geographic area as one of its primary geographic funding areas. And so, this organization was able to make that connection to receive that national support. Let's look at a next example. And going into this slide with some intimidation, because I will tell you that we've heard that there is some disagreement about the pronunciation of this particular area. I like berries, so I'm going to go with the Greater WilkesBarre Growth Partnership. I welcome any of you to challenge and correct me. But what's most important is to take a look at what we can learn from looking at this organization. So this organization too is providing local services. And interestingly, they have a little bit of a mix, more of a mix in their funding. So we can take a look and see that they're getting some local funding, they're getting some Pennsylvania funding, they're getting some regional funding. They also are getting a larger portion of national grants. Now, this is an economic development corporation, and the national funding that they've received is from Wells Fargo. The reason being because Wells Fargo is investing in economic development and is doing so in areas that include this geographic area. Next slide is the Northeast Regional Cancer Institute. Now, there's something a little bit different about this organization. They do provide local services that impact the local community, but they're also focused on an issue that is boundaryless. Organizations, especially health-related organizations that focus on, critical health issues like cancer, can attract more national funding because there are funders who are really invested in treatments, research, other strategies for alleviating these particular health issues. In this case, the highest portion of their funding, in fact, comes from national grants, which here too includes the Wildcard Foundation. I think one takeaway from today's presentation is if you don't already have a strategy for approaching the Wildcard Foundation, it's worth looking carefully at their primary funding areas and seeing if your organization aligns to those. And let's go to our final example. We wanted to hit on different organization types. So this is Everhart Museum. And as can be common, I mean, this is an area that obviously welcomes local members of the community, provides local programming, and they have a large portion of their funding that is coming from local sources. Because this is an arts and culture organization, and because there are national funding opportunities that align to that work, we think this is an example of an organization that could be more ambitious in seeking national funding. For example, this museum might think about approaching the National Endowment for the Arts or the Hearst Foundation. What's important is, again, that each organization consider its unique context. There's going to be a different context when it comes to national funding for health-focused organizations, for arts and culture-focused organizations, economic development organizations. Every organization is different and there is no magic formula. What it comes down to is understanding your unique context, your unique circumstances, and also considering where are you likely to be most fruitful in pursuing funding. We always stress that there is an opportunity cost that comes with grant seeking. Just as we started in the beginning, there is a finite number of funders. There is a finite number of funders that may fund in your particular area and for your particular organization type. A part of your grant seeking strategy is to consider where are your best opportunities to seek funding so that the time, the investment that you put into developing those relationships and seeking those grants is the time best spent. We're going to move into some discussion now about what does it mean to actually think about approaching foundations, national foundations, once you have assessed your unique context.
Great. And I wanted to back up for 1 second. We did have a poll at the beginning, I think, that we overlooked. And so, Matt, can we do that poll one? Great. So you have a poll on your screen. Go ahead and answer that. Here we're looking at your experience with national level funders. Either you've never even tried to apply, you've investigated but not applied, you've applied for funding but never gotten funding, or you've applied and won. Hopefully those are all the scenarios. And we get a look at the results. Okay, so we have some who have never even tried. We have some who have applied but not gotten funding, and we have some who've applied for and won national funding, and that's actually the largest category at 43%, so that's great. Good, we have a broad mix of experience, which is really good. Hopefully you'll have something that you can take away from this. Let's go ahead and launch poll 2 then, Matt. These are just for those who have not applied to get a little bit more into your whys. Either you haven't had time, the process is too complicated. You can pick multiple of these. We don't think our work would be competitive. We don't do any work that an international funder might be interested in. And of course, there may be many more reasons, but go ahead and pick any of those that apply to you. And we recognize that half of you, this doesn't apply. This whole poll doesn't apply. Give it another second. All right. Oh boy, we are evenly spread. That's okay. No time to think about it. Listen, I understand. We definitely understand the competing priorities. Applications and proposals are too complex. We don't think our work would be competitive. At least none of you think that you don't do any work that any national funder may be interested in. And I think that's fair. There are many, many, many national funders. And so especially what we're talking about here, it's sort of like a fruit salad. You know, there's a lot of opportunities. So, all right, let's move on. Just 1 second here. Okay. So let's start with the 2 very most basic requirements for being competitive for national funding. First, as we've been reiterating, your work must fall within a national funder's guidelines. This is true with every single funder who you approach. And often national funders have very high bars. So they have very specific guidelines. And then second, that you work in a geography that either they serve, that funder is concerned with, or that funder is not bound by any geography. And so with all funders, your work must advance their mission, as we said, or create the change that that funder wants to see in the world. And just one thing to keep in the back of your mind, and we'll address it a little more later too, but we are always thinking about the greater ecosystem that that each funder is concerned with. In the Ford Foundation, what are they concerned with? What's their ecosystem? And so if you can think about how do we, nonprofit organization, impact the ecosystem that this funder is concerned with, that's going to be your best argument for funding. So what are the keys to making your work attractive to national funders? Let's dig into that a little bit. First and foremost, you must create measurable change in the world. And this is really true for all funders, but it's especially true for national level funders. So you're creating change in people's lives. You're creating the change that the funder is seeking to make in the world, and that you're doing so in ways that you can quantify and qualify. And so you must be able to demonstrate that change, whereas there may be local funders, and this is a broad generalization, but there may be local funders who are just happy that your services exist in their community. For national funders, many times they may require more specific results. So you want to be thinking about evaluation, making sure that you're building that evaluation into your work, and not just that you're measuring what you're doing, but that you are taking the input and feedback that's coming through, and then you're making changes related to that as you go. And then lastly, that your organization is some type of leader, or can demonstrate that it's some type of leader in making this change that the funder wants to see. So if a funder is making 20 grants, how are you going to make the case that you are one of the best in 20 organizations in the nation that does this? And I always challenge our clients to think, and how do you know that? How do you know that you are one of the best? Are you leading in creating new best practices in this space? Have you even studied what else is out there? I am often surprised at how many times I will hear, like, we're leading in the country, we're doing the best, this is the only one in the country, whatever. And then when you dig into it, they really haven't looked around. Have you looked around? Are you also piloting a new idea? And if it's new, how do you know it's not just new to you, and that it's actually a truly novel idea? So another factor is that you can demonstrate community buy-in. So we have many funders that are looking favorably on organizations that not only understand their place in the ecosystem, but also require buy-in from the greater community. So they want to know that those impacted by your work or by your services also have a voice in doing what you do. So this can be community members. For example, there are many, in many cities, there are museums that are articulating increasingly how they're involving neighborhood residents, many of whom have felt historically disconnected from those museums. And can stakeholders, even your funders or government agencies, be included in that community buy-in, that trisectoral approach that I talked about before? And then if your program or your project works with partners, how are your partners involved in the design of what you do? And we're going to talk more about partnership in a moment. So go to the next slide. Another factor, though, is how do you demonstrate your commitment to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And funders in the last year and a half have brought increased attention to this DEI work, and many have doubled down on it, in the most recent months. And funders may directly ask, what are you doing to advance DEI? And some may not make grants to organizations without a strong plan or a strong record of action in this realm. And so tying tying your services and what you do to making sure that participants and that everyone in a community has a voice in your program can be a help. The other thing is that many nonprofit organizations, staff and boards are not reflective, especially racially, of the communities that are served. So making sure that you're better in line. So when possible, you want to show how you are improving diversity, equity, and inclusion within your organization, among those that you serve, and in your community as a whole. So an example within your organization might be recruiting board members that better reflect the community that you serve, or recruiting staff that better reflect the community you serve. Improving DEI among those you serve might look like really working to address those systemic issues that are faced by people served in your community. And then doing the work in the community might be joining in on some social justice movement. Maybe it's through collaboration, or you're participating in coalitions that not only complement your mission, but are also creating a more equitable world. And this harkens back to the example of partnerships. So an example of this is the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. This is a really great real world example of what we're talking about. And that is that the first contact that they request is an LOI, 1,500 characters. Applicants must show the outcomes that they will achieve. So they have to demonstrate the difference that they're making. They have to show who their partners are, and they have to show what they are doing to address racial equity and community engagement. And we like how Kellogg considers how a potential grantee is working with the community and advancing racial equity as important as your program description is important. And so Matt's going to give us a case study of this in action. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Matt, the producer, jumping in here. This is actually a client of mine. So this is a youth service agency in a nameless Midwestern state that serves immigrant and refugee youth, many of whom are Muslim. This organization is as grassroots as it gets. The executive director still does not draw a salary. The program staff are largely from the community. Actually, a bunch of the program staff were some of the first kids they served 7 years ago. The entire thing is basically the end result of a DEI plan, is what it comes down to. And yet, they still have got to justify this organization that, if you look at them, the platonic ideal of what people are looking for with their DEI plans. I'm actually going to a meeting with them next week where we are going to have to create a DEI plan to make a funder happy. So if an organization like this has to talk about what it's doing with DEI, I think that behooves us to all look at our organizations and make sure that if we are not at that level of diversity and community involvement, that we still have got to look within and really talk about how we are going to advance equity.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. Good example, good points. So then just a sort of recap, if we want to meet the bar for national funding, Matt, you want to flip? Yeah. As you know, you may have guessed that these are markers of organizations that may find success in raising money from national funders. It is not necessary that you have all of these markers in order to garner national attention, but the more you can say, yes, we have that, the more you can check the box, the more national funders may figure into your overall institutional or grant funding strategy. So next, I'm going to pass it to Dana, who's going to bring our presentation home, and she's going to address how you can start to connect with those national level funders.
And what we'd like to leave you with today is something that is applicable in almost every situation where you're approaching a funder, including approaching national funders. And that is that good grant seeking incorporates connection and relationships. Sure, there's always the story of that one executive director who sent in an application with with nothing that came before it and received a grant. But that is overwhelmingly the exception and not the rule. Funders, like any other type of funder, are people who are giving to people, to good causes, and that opportunity to connect with a person exists, whether we're talking about an individual donor or an institutional funder. So let's look at, when we take that best practice of relationship building, what are some of the realities when it comes to national funders? Well, one thing to acknowledge is that it may require some deeper intention and strategy to make connections with national funders. Matt, can you populate this slide, please? So first, what kind of relationships, what kind of connections are we talking about? Well, one, start with who your connections are to find where their connections may be. We have a practice when we are helping an organization to approach funders of looking at, well, let's look at this foundation and let's look at who serves on their board. Let's look at who serves on their staff. And then for our clients, they have the opportunity to see, where is there a match between someone at that foundation and someone in their own orbit. So that may be talking with your board members, either generally or looking at specific foundation board and staff lists to see where may they have connections. Also, speaking with your partner organizations. In that spirit of all boats rise, if you have a partner organization who is able to be successful gaining funding from a national funder, see if they'll have a conversation with you about the steps that they took. Who is it that they have been speaking with? And is that a person who might be accessible to you as well? And then finally, your own funders. Just like Maggie started us off today, she said, hey, it helps us at the Scranton Area Community Foundation to stretch our dollars further if we're able to bring in additional support from outside the community. Have a conversation with the funders that have been funding you over time to explore with them, where might they have connections? Where might they have suggestions or be able to make introductions for you? Once you've found that connection, well, what do you do? And another best practice is to ask for advice. So just like when you are applying for a job, your cover letter, it's not really about like getting a job, getting a start date. It's about getting an invitation, getting yourself even in the room, whether virtual or real, to have that conversation and that connection. So when making contact with a connection at a foundation, do so in the spirit of asking for advice, in hearing their thoughts, in sharing that, for example, that they care about something, that your organization is demonstrating impact in that area, and could you have a conversation about where those areas align? There's that saying, if you want something, if you want money, you want advice, ask for money. You want money, ask for advice. So, keep that in mind. And then you can also get creative. So what if your board doesn't have those connections? What if you really have to start from scratch? Well, the first thing you should do is, when you've identified national funders whose priorities align to your work, follow them on social media. Many funders have Twitter, they use LinkedIn. That may be where they're communicating the grants that they make, where you can actually find via LinkedIn who are the employees of that foundation or others connected that perhaps you can forge a connection with online. Attending conferences. We hope, that we will be returning to a time where we're meeting more in person, whether virtual or online. How can you be in the same spaces where funders are to have that run-in, to have that opportunity to connect outside of the application process? Certainly other places, getting on newsletter lists, following publications, reading the Chronicle of Philanthropy, for example, places where you can be learning and following who are the thought leaders at that foundation. How can you enrich your understanding of what they care about towards the goal of making new connections? So let's also acknowledge, though, that it can be more challenging to build relationship with national foundations for the sheer, volume of potential grantees that they are receiving inquiries from, to just that higher bar when it comes to access. Sometimes foundations, especially national foundations, don't include contact information. They may even explicitly say, don't contact us. As Lauren said, they make their own rules. Let's look at a couple examples that we have for you of foundations that, in terms of how they are presenting their availability. So the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, this is a snapshot from their website, and you'll see explicitly stated in their how to apply section that they do make themselves available, but it's via a concierge desk. So they have thought about at least how do they make themselves accessible for questions, and they've provided a dedicated resource for that. Certainly, this doesn't mean you shouldn't still look to see where may you have connections, personal connections with the Kellogg Foundation. You know, that personal connection might be even more valuable, but this is an example of a funder who's found a creative strategy to be accessible. The next example, the John Templeton Foundation, we just liked the, it's just pretty black and white. There's a Q&A page. Can I, may I, should I contact the foundation to discuss my project idea? The answer is no. They direct potential grantees to submit an online funding inquiry as the first step. And so they have decided that this is the process for them. So, take things with a grain of salt. Again, try to leverage personal connections where you can, but this is the reality when it comes to some foundations, especially national. But let's leave on a more hopeful note, which is that it is possible. It is possible, it is preferable, and it is often very, very valuable to make contact with a funder before submitting a proposal. And the reasons for doing so are many. One, because you want to ensure that there is indeed the match that you suspect between the work you are doing and what that funder cares about. It can be powerful, one, to confirm that match so that you don't spend time unnecessarily pursuing a funder when you could have found out early on that this wasn't a great opportunity. And we have good examples of program officers who have been very direct with applicants to say, hey, it's great to hear about your idea. I'm happy to know that you're doing this work. Now isn't a good time. They may direct you to apply in a future funding cycle, or they may share with you that they don't think that this is a project that they'll be making room for in their philanthropic portfolio. So a no early is better than a no later, so that you can stay focused on the funders where you're more likely to be successful. Other reasons for contacting a funder could be more practical. You may want to check in on their process to confirm that you understand the process, that you are following through correctly on things. We would advise you not to ask questions that are easily answered by viewing their website and reading through the guidelines. Don't waste a grant maker's time, but do seek clarification where that is genuine and helpful. And then also, what could be better than a program officer saying to you, I like this idea. I suggest that you incorporate this, or I hope you talk about that, so that when your grant proposal lands on their desk, they say, oh, good. I remember this conversation. They took my advice. I'm glad to see that the benefit of that communication is now putting them in a better position to gain funding. So lots of good reasons to seek this relationship with funders. So we want to leave you with a summary of what we've discussed today. Which of you, now that we've had this conversation, for you to step back and reflect on, is my organization likely to be competitive for national level funding? This is an area where it's important to have a realistic perspective so that you can make good choices. If you are going into the process with national level funders, remember what we've talked about what they're looking for and that high bar that you'll need to meet. And then finally, don't forget the best practice of seeking to develop relationship, because it can make all the difference. So we may have a couple of minutes for questions, but before we get to that, I do want to acknowledge that this is our last session. We have hosted 6 of these webinars. They are available now for viewing if you've missed any of them. So please check your email to gain more information about accessing those, as well as the other guides and resources that are available on the website that we've created for this relationship. So with that, I do see we have some questions. Matt or Maggie, would you like to, would anyone like to lead us? Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
I can just jump in. It looks like Rose is asking about the best way to find funders that are compatible. So, you know, the best way is really using the tools that exist out there. Our favorite tool is Foundation Directory Online. You know, there may be other tools that other organizations use, and you can feel free to share with each other, maybe in the chat, if there's other tools that you use. But we're really looking for 2 things, Rose, with that. When we're looking in that tool, we're looking at what a foundation says they fund and support and what they actually fund and support. And we're looking for alignment then between what you do and either what is their stated mission or purpose and what is what their actual gifts have gone to. And for that, we're looking at similarly situated organizations that exist within your geographic area, in your space, maybe just in the issue area that you're working in. So we're looking at, again, alignment in 2 ways, with what the funder says they fund and support and what the funder has actually funded and supported. Hope that's helpful. Are there any other questions?
Well, we really appreciate this time that we have spent with you, not just today, but over the last few months. And Maggie, thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you both so much. This was very valuable information, and I'm just very grateful to both of you and to GrantsPlus, the entire team there, for all the help that you have provided for all of these sessions. So thank you so much. As you pointed out, recordings are available on our YouTube page. And I'm not sure, are there any more sessions still available for the one-on-one through the end of the year? I'm trying to remember the schedule on it. There might be some additional available. But if you have any questions or concerns, always feel free to reach out to us. And then we will be in touch in the new year about some additional opportunities. So thank you again, GrantsPlus, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.